Welcome to our presidential campaign roundtable. I'm your host, Rohan Sinha. So let's get started with some questions. Question 1. Hillary Clinton has changed her position on a number of issues since her tenure as Secretary of State and the First Lady. Do you think voters will punish her for this going into the polls?
I don't think so personally. I think they were thinking so through the summer, and I think that led to the growth of the Bernie Sanders campaign and the decline of her popularity. But in the debate in October, the October 13th debate, I think she was able to put her ideas out there and prove to the American people that she was solidified on the issues, and that, I think, helped her campaign get back off the ground.
Well, yeah, I'd say he has a point. Like, for one thing, like, I think, like, a lot of the voters, like, in the end, they're going to go with Hillary because, like, a lot of people, like, think that, like, you know, they're, like, their best chance for the White House.
So don't get me wrong, I do think Hillary Clinton does benefit from political expediency, and she does shift her positions on issues, rather. But I do think that voters won't really care about it by the time they go to the polls because there are other issues that are more important to them.
Yeah, it's important to remember that the Clintons, more than anything, are politicians of the time. So in the 90s, when Bill Clinton was running for president, he ran as a neoliberal, third-way Democrat who was, pro-business and all that. And I think that's because the country was simply more conservative. That was after the Reagan administration in the 80s, and he had certainly taken the country in a rightward direction. But now, after the financial crisis, people are really wanting more populism in their candidate, and I think we've seen that with the rise of Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump on the right.
So moving on to the next question. Question number 2. Donald Trump has been labeled as a demagogue by numerous facets of the editorial press. Do these accusations have any merit, or are they merely knee-jerk reactions to Trump's unorthodoxy?
I would say that Donald Trump isn't really, in my opinion, a serious candidate because he's really feeding off of the anger of the public rather than talking about ideas that really would make sense with him being the president and putting those ideas into place.
I agree with you on your second point there, but not the first one. I do think he is a serious candidate. His poll numbers certainly prove that. And I think that people have desperately wanted him to go away and sort of fade from the race, but he hasn't. He really hasn't.
Well, I don't think that says that he is a serious candidate. That just might mean at this current period in the race,
Well, here, what I think that, like,
the voters or the people that are participating in these polls aren't necessarily as serious as well.
So what you mean is his ideals aren't really serious?
Sure.
well, I think that, like, he's, like, a businessman. So I think that's, like, a lot of people, like, kind of forget. Like, when, like, politicians usually come into this, they think, like, hey, we can't get this done, so, like, why should we fight for it? So, like, Donald Trump, when, like, he says, like, something ridiculous, like, I want to ban Muslims from coming to the U.S., doesn't necessarily mean he actually thinks he'll get it done. But I think, like, what he, like, kind of, like, was going for a lot of this stuff is that he wants to negotiate from a position of power.
Yeah.
So that transitions to our next question. How is it that Trump, someone who has never occupied a public office before, leads in the Republican polls?
Thank you. Well, I kind of just think that people, like what he says. Like, like the stuff, like, his anti-political correctness. Like, I think people actually like it because he's a Washington outsider. Because, like, they think, like, the people in Washington haven't really been living up to, like, their promises. So they think that, like, someone, like, outside of Washington, like, isn't, like, a part of that, like, Washington machine, like, so to say. And, like, I'd actually kind of, like, agree with that. But not necessarily, like, for someone to have no experience at all. But still, I think, like, that's, like, a part of, like, his big appeal, actually, that, like, like, he, like, wasn't, like, he's not a politician. Like, he actually, like, means what he says, and, like, he'll do it. So I think that's what people take away from, like, him, like, what he says.
And I also think that this appeal to a candidate who has no experience in government comes from the fact that Republicans are very anti-government when it comes to the issues. They want government to stay out of their life more so than Democrats. So I think it's really no surprise that candidates who have little experience in Washington are doing so well in the Republican field because they don't have a trust for government. especially with our current president, who they really have no liking for at all.
Yeah.
Ted Cruz certainly proves that he's not necessarily the most experienced senator. He hasn't actually done anything significant in terms of legislation. Well, hang on. He's been more of a ideologue, and he's displayed an ideology that's appealing to people rather than certain specific actions that he's done that have actually helped people.
Well, I would also.
I think more than anything, it's an ideal thing. It's an ideal.
Yeah, Donald Trump, definitely.
I would also say before Noah says what he has to say, Ted Cruz has done significant things,
Definitely.
but they just haven't been good. Okay,
Well-
when the government shutdown happened, that was really led by Ted Cruz.
Well, that's what I'm saying. It's sort of like an
predominantly,
anti-doing
and that
something.
Well, the
cost
thing
the
is that-
government millions of dollars. So he.
But how
has
much does
done
Obamacare
things
cost,
that
like,
have
Americans?
affected
Actually-
the government, but it just hasn't been beneficial to the American public.
Well, I think like people like when someone takes a stand, like Ted Cruz, and like I think he really has like taken a stand.
So on the
like,
note of
Obamacare.
taking a stand, I'm going to move on to the next question. Both Republicans and Democrats have displayed strains of populism throughout the race, such as Bernie Sanders on income inequality, Trump on immigration. How have mainstream candidates responded to this populism?
Well, Jeb Bush has gone down. like you know, like kind of like he's not really like an exciting candidate, and like kind of people like think he's like kind of mushy. I think, like they kind of want something more exciting, like you know, like a Donald Trump. So like you know when like Jeb Bush has like been like politics, I don't know, like 20 years ago, like he's like governor of like Florida. That's like a long time ago. They don't really remember him. When they see some like famous like Donald Trump, who's like kind of like really like energetic, really exciting, like he's saying like all these things that like some people find like really attractive. I think that's kind of like brings like.
Well, and also more important is things that people find repulsive. He sort of feeds off negative media press. It's sort of a self-perpetuating cycle. The media denounces him, and he only gets stronger, and then the media denounces him. And I
Not
think that
just him,
I
too.
think part of the problem is with
Republicans
people
as a whole.
desperately want him to go away, but part of the problem is no one's saying why his ideas are bad. If you look at the op-ed sections of like various newspapers, people are saying, "Oh, he's doing these bad things," like, and people are just taking it for granted that everybody understands. People think that, or the op-ed writers in this case, think that everyone understands why it's bad, what he's saying, but no one's
Well-
actually stepping up and saying, here's why this is bad, here's
Well,
why this is un-American.
Well, I think like
And
people
also
will
on
have-
the point of the media and Donald Trump, I have a problem that the media has been giving free advertising to Donald Trump throughout this campaign. They're having him on the show
right.
24/7. He's coming in and telling the American public what he thinks, and he doesn't even have to pay for it because he's on the show so much, just telling
And
the
then-
American people
people
for
are
free.
racist and like a sexist like a fair amount of times. And I think people have like said like you know this stuff he says is like really like bad. The thing is that like I think like what that really feeds into is that like a really anti-political correctness feeling in the Republican Party.
Well,
Like I think that like a lot of people are kind of like think like when the media like says someone's a racist that like maybe like the media is like wrong. Like maybe this guy shouldn't be.
Well,
backing
it's
down.
not necessarily false that he's showed racism. He
Yeah,
showed
but- doesn't necessarily matter to the
But
voters.
no
right?
one-
racist
no one-
qualities in this race. He showed sexist qualities in this race. So it's not necessarily the media's fault for
people-
saying
Well, the problem
he's
is
racist
whether-
and
but
sexist.
the problem is whether or not his
because
voters like it.
It's not necessarily false. And then also as an answer to the question as a whole, I would say that the establishment of both parties have taken really different routes on how to handle the populism coming from their bases. So the Republican Party has really said to their voters, you've got to be kidding me, right? You really like this guy? You really like Donald Trump and Ted Cruz and Ben Carson? And the Democratic Party has, like more so Hillary Clinton, has kind of moved closer to the populism as the race has gone on.
side of that. On the right, you know, candidates that are moderates or used to be moderates like Bush and Christie, you've seen them pull rightward. Just because, you know, the other right-wing candidates that are really far right, Ted Cruz, Donald Trump, Ben Carson are gaining all the press and are gaining the attention of the press, and they realize that they have to keep up. It's sort of like they're being attracted to this whole sphere of populism
Well,
on both parties.
I don't really think their ideology, you know, like the Republican side has really changed much. Like maybe like their approach to it, like pretty much like Jeb Bush attacking Donald Trump and like
Well,
other
I wouldn't
candidates.
say
like,
also the approach. I
supporting
would
it.
say like Donald Trump and Ben Carson and Ted Cruz throughout the campaign have not held back to say things that may or may not draw backlash
Yeah,
from the
exactly.
community. And the establishment candidates, Bush, Rubio, Christie, even Kasich, at first really did keep themselves away from saying stuff like that. But as the race has progressed, they've become more of a comedian of sorts,
Yeah.
or just trying to draw attention from the public and the media, no matter if it's good or bad.
Yeah, I guess just people are kind of just sick of the establishment in general.
So moving on to the next question. Many candidates, including Bernie Sanders, have criticized the Supreme Court's 2010 decision on Citizens United, which allowed corporations and labor unions to spend unlimited amounts of money on campaigns. What are the ramifications of this decision on the 2016 race specifically?
Oh, I think it's huge, especially on the Democratic side, because Bernie Sanders at first has taken a huge stance on this. He's made it a huge part of the campaign, which in turn has made the other candidates accept it, and now it's a huge part of the entire race as a whole. And I mean, he has reason behind it. Wall Street has been making horrible decisions, and they've been reckless, and that's really a major player in the 2008 financial collapse. And to have corporations spending millions and even billions of dollars on being able to choose a candidate, it's really not fair. And it's no longer a democracy, it's an oligarchy, having a small few who are fortunate enough to have this money to be able to give to the candidates of their choice doesn't allow for the entire society to give the money because they don't have the money to give.
Well, I think it's kind of hard to like say, like, you know, the government should like go in and regulate this, because like people do have a right to say, like, no, we like this guy.
But it's
We
not
have the right to
people,
give
it's
people-
corporations.
Right. Well,
And
it is people too,
corporations, a
though.
lot of corporations don't have to pay taxes at all, or they get a lot of tax breaks, but yet they're considered people when it comes to the issue of giving to campaigns. But
But-
then people have to pay taxes.
Yeah, of course. But
Corporations
corporations do
don't.
too. Yeah,
No.
there's corporal tax.
Corporations.
Not the same tax rate, though. He's saying that
Very-
because they're
Yeah,
considered
there's still
people.
tax rates, though.
low
But I-
compared
the-
to income
but I
tax
think the
rates, and
point-
some
well-
corporations really pay nothing at all.
Yeah, but I think they still have the right to like endorse someone. Like, look, some of
They
these
can endorse them, but they can't give millions of dollars because that
Billions.
alters
Yeah.
But look,
the
but look,
way
look
that
at
the
Donald.
campaign is run.
But look at Donald
and they're
Trump.
not in a similar place that the people are.
Yeah, but look at Donald Trump. Like kind of like you say, like, you know, this is corrupting a lot of people. But like Donald Trump, like, you know, he's like kind of like soaring to the top of the polls. He's like self-funded.
Donald
So I don't
Trump,
think
that's
it-
the thing, that's what I was about to bring up. This is not just an issue that we're seeing on the left. Now the right, the far right has picked it up as well. Donald Trump is not accepting donations
Yeah.
from, he doesn't have a super PAC. He's got $0 in super PAC money right now, according to the New York Times. I have that stat right in front of me. So I think that this is, and Bernie Sanders, he's sort of cast this campaign finance issue as a sort of part of his political revolution. He you know, his campaign is all about how the billionaire class in the United States is sort of hijacking what it means to be American. I think actually Bernie Sanders' campaign is pretty conservative, if you ask me, because, you know,
That's not social.
50, 60 years ago, stuff like this didn't happen. You know, CEOs were making 365 times the, you know, their minimum paid employee in their company. Corporations couldn't give millions of dollars to political candidates. And, you know, after the financial crash of, you know, 1929, we regulated Wall Street really strictly. And now after the 2008 financial crisis, we're seeing those regulations roll back. So he's casting as sort of a larger issue, how the moneyed class is sort of taking over the country and destroying what it means. I actually think this campaign is really American. People have cast it as socialist and sort of foreign, but it's not. It's really American.
And I would also say, I don't think it's a matter of conservative or liberal. I just think Bernie,
But what I'm saying is that it's sort of reminiscent of the past, the way
Sure,
things
sure.
were. And
Well-
now, you know, post-Reagan, it's the way things are now, and that's not something that's sort of desirable for people who support
Sure.
the Sanders campaign. So I think that it's actually, it's surprisingly conservative. the whole
Well,
movement.
no, well,
and
I think
political revolution. You mentioned that. I think that's also a major player.
But it's a
in
revolution
Bernie
to get
Sanders'
back
yeah,
to the way
but
things
but
were.
look, but like
well, hold on. It's
like
just,
one of
it's
the
a
big parts
major
of
player in
conservatism,
his
though.
success in the election the way he's running his campaign compared to Hillary Clinton on the Democratic side and the other candidates on the Republican side, he really is gaining enthusiasm that really hasn't been seen in a long time, except for in the Obama campaign. It's gaining a large enthusiasm from the voters, a lot of voters that don't normally show up to the polls, but now they're interested because it's a candidate they can come behind. And also, the way he's running it, the way that he's organizing his campaign on the ground, online, it's really strong. And the fact of the matter is, he's actually meeting Hillary Clinton in donations, and he doesn't have a super PAC. He doesn't accept money from millionaires and billionaires. His average campaign donation is under $20. So it shows how well he's doing and how well his campaign is doing to be able to have this strong of a movement in such a society where business is really encouraged, and it's encouraged to just let the wealthy do whatever they want.
Well,
So
I don't
we'll have one
think
last comment from Noah, and we'll have to conclude this segment.
Well, I think like the thing with like Bernie Sanders, like I wouldn't like say that like he's particularly conservative. Like definitely not.
Well, that's not what I'm
Well,
saying.
he's
I'm
not.
saying
Of course
like
he's
let me
not. Of course
let
he's
me
not.
get back to this. Okay, so I'm trying to just go over a couple points here. Like for one thing, like a lot of the stuff like he's like going after is like kind of like like anti-conservative, and like on kind of like on your thing, on like how like he's doing really well. Like he's doing well in New Hampshire and Iowa, which are like is like of course he'd do well in there, like rural white states more
Well,
or
he's
less.
putting effort
Yeah,
into
but-
those
but,
states.
you know-
Those are the states where
Yeah, everyone's
every
putting effort into
candidate
good
is
states,
putting
yeah.
the effort into, and the fact of the matter is Bernie Sanders' campaign is so strong, especially in the ground movement, in the grassroots movement, that he's gaining more traction in those states.
Yeah, wait.
Everybody's there.
And
It's
can I
my
just
comment.
say,
Everybody's
It's
can
my
I just
comment
say,
on it.
when I meant conservative, I did not mean the conservative as like the political definition. I meant to conserve something. I think what we're seeing is people are seeing the way things were. In the 50s and the 60s, we had this shared
But-
growth. We had this shared growth where the economy's growing now, but all the sort of earnings are going to the top 1%, as opposed to in the 50s, 60s,
here-
and 70s when that wasn't happening.
That's not
So I
my
think
comment.
we're just trying to get back to that.
Well,
that
the thing
doesn't
is
make it a conservative movement. It just means that it's sort of trying to get back. It's sort of reminiscent of the past.
Well, the thing is that,
Thank you for coming to this presidential campaign roundtable. Thank you for watching.